My daughter-in-law called me on a Wednesday afternoon in early May. Her voice was soft, rehearsed like someone reading from a script they hadn't quite memorized. "Emily," she said, "I was thinking, maybe we could do a little Mother's Day trip. Just the two of us, no kids, no chores, a little escape." I paused, letting the suggestion sit. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. It had been a long while since Lauren had invited me to anything. Most holidays, I was included as an afterthought. A paper plate at the end of the table, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But this was different. Warmth, even affection, threaded through her tone. "I'd love that," I heard myself say. "That's very kind of you." "We'll take the train from Belmont," she continued. "Alex will drive us. I'll handle everything." Belmont was a small town about 40 minutes away. The kind of place with one post office, a bakery that still used handwritten receipts, and a train station that looked like it had been forgotten by time. I hadn't been there in years. I hung up the phone and sat quietly for a while, listening to the old clock tick above the mantel. David, my husband, used to say, "I packed with my heart, not my head." "Why bring a scarf?" he'd laugh, "when you could bring the whole season?" So I folded the lavender handkerchief he gave me for our 30th anniversary and tucked it into my purse. Slipped a few ginger candies into a glass jar, the kind I kept in my coat pocket for when my stomach turned on bumpy roads. And finally, I reached for my notebook, the leather-bound one David had inscribed with a shaky hand the year before he passed. "Write it all down, Em. Even the little things, especially the little things." The next morning, I dressed in my navy coat and cream wool scarf. The trees were just beginning to bloom outside my kitchen window, but the air still held a sharpness. I sat on the porch swing for a moment before the car arrived. I watched the wind push through the grass and thought, perhaps foolishly, that this might be the start of something softer between Lauren and me. A healing. Alex pulled up in his silver SUV. He looked tired, always working, always rushing, but he gave me a quick smile and helped me into the front seat. Lauren didn't speak much during the ride. She fiddled with her phone, scrolled through something silently. Alex hummed to the radio. We arrived at Belmont Station around 10:15. It was just as I remembered, quiet, tucked between an old feed store and a closed-down diner. The platform was empty, save for a few pigeons and a man asleep on a bench with a paperback resting on his chest. "We're early," Lauren said brightly. "I'm going to grab the tickets. Alex, can you help me?" I nodded and sat down on a wooden bench. The paint had chipped, revealing the silver beneath. I placed my bag gently at my feet and wrapped the lavender handkerchief around my fingers. They walked away toward the ticket booth, Alex's shoulders hunched, Lauren tapping her nails against her phone. I waited. The wind picked up, and I pulled my coat tighter. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I stood up, walked toward the ticket counter. It was closed, no lights on, no staff inside. I turned slowly, scanning the lot. No silver SUV, no Lauren, no Alex. I walked back to the bench and sat down again, heart thudding in my chest, not from panic, not yet, but from a familiar sense of something being wrong. I looked around the bench and noticed a slip of paper half tucked beneath the seat where Lauren had been sitting. I reached for it with shaking hands. "If you're still capable, you'll find your way home." That was all it said. Typed. No name, no punctuation, just those words. Cold. Clinical. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or call for help. Instead, I folded the note once, then twice, and slipped it into my notebook. I reached for a pen and wrote beneath the last grocery list I jotted down. May 11th, Lauren and Alex left me at Belmont Station. Intentional. Testing me? I looked out over the tracks, the empty horizon, the closed diner with its fading, "Try our meatloaf" sign. I wasn't sure what they were expecting, that I would forget where I was, that I'd wander aimlessly, proving some diagnosis they hoped to conjure. I didn't know the rules of their test, But I knew one thing with certainty: I was not going to fail. The wind at Belmont Station didn't howl, it whispered. Long, slow breaths that slipped beneath coat collars and found the soft skin of your neck. It was the kind of cold that wasn't about temperature, it was about absence. No voices, no motion, just the stillness of a place abandoned by time. I sat perfectly still on that weathered bench, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the platform ahead, as if a train might roll in at any moment and return something I'd lost. I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting there, 15 minutes, 20, long enough to know no one was coming back. I didn't call out. I didn't chase after the SUV that had vanished without a trace. Instead, I waited. It was only when I reached down to adjust my purse that I saw it. A corner of paper poking out from under the slat of the bench where Lauren had been sitting. It wasn't there when I arrived, I was sure of that. I picked it up. The paper was folded once, not creased deeply, just enough to suggest it had been done hastily. I opened it slowly, almost reverently, as if it might contain some explanation. It didn't. It said only, "If you're still capable, you'll find your way home." There was no signature, no date, no apology. Just those words typed in a standard serif font, printed cleanly on white paper. I read it again, then again. My fingers didn't tremble, my breath didn't quicken. I simply folded the note back along its original crease, slid it into the inside pocket of my coat, and stared out across the empty tracks. I understood in that moment that this was not a mistake, not a miscommunication, not a forgotten errand or a traffic delay. This was a test, and not the kind you take in a classroom. This was something colder, more calculated, a trial designed not to be passed but to be failed, because failing would mean proof that I couldn't be trusted, that I was forgetful, confused, unwell, proof that I was no longer fit to live on my own, to manage my own money, to sign my own name on a legal form. I'd heard about cases like this, quiet conversations between neighbors at the pharmacy, murmurs at church about sons or daughters trying to rush their parents into protection. It always started the same. One incident, one moment of forgetfulness, and suddenly a petition was filed. A court was involved, guardianship was granted, and the person, usually a woman, usually over 60, became a shadow of herself in her own story. I never thought I'd be one of them. But there I was, sitting on a cold bench, holding a typed note like an execution notice. A small part of me wanted to laugh, not out of humor, but out of something more bitter. The absurdity of it all. That after raising a child, paying a mortgage, surviving the death of a husband, and living a life held together by grocery lists and late-night prayers, I was now being reduced to a test score. If you're still capable. As if the love I gave, the meals I cooked, the years I spent making sure everyone else had what they needed, none of that mattered. Just capability, just performance. Just passing the trap they'd set for me. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my hip catching slightly as it always did in the cold. I looked around the station. The sun had shifted, throwing long shadows across the platform. The man who'd been sleeping earlier was gone. The diner was still closed. There was no staff, no help desk, no taxi stand. But there was a road, a cracked, narrow road that led out of town, and if I remembered correctly, eventually curved toward Route 92, the highway that would take me back home. I adjusted the strap of my purse across my shoulder, tucked the notebook under my arm, and took one last look at the bench where I'd been left. It looked so ordinary, so forgettable, like hundreds of others across the country. But to me, it was now a monument, not to my weakness, but to theirs, to the choice they made, to the quiet violence of betrayal disguised as concern. I took my first step, then another. With each footfall, I felt the truth settle deeper inside me, not hot and angry, but cool and steady. They wanted to test me. They were about to learn just how capable I still was. The road out of Belmont didn't begin with sidewalks or street signs, just gravel and weeds, then cracked asphalt littered with last autumn's leaves, curling brown and thin as onion skin. The wind had teeth, and the sky above me was the flat, pale kind that promised neither rain nor mercy. I walked, no destination in mind, only the pull of home, not even the house itself, but the idea of it. Familiar sheets, the creak of the hallway floorboards, the kettle that whistled a little off-key. I held that idea like a thread in my palm, something to follow even as my legs ached and the cold bit through my stockings. There were no cars on the road, just the soft crunch of my shoes, the distant call of a crow, and the rhythm of my own breath. I passed a shuttered gas station with a tilted sign that still read Gulf in faded orange. One window was cracked. Behind it, a row of dusty snack machines stood like forgotten soldiers. A faded flag hung limp above the door. No one inside, no phone, no heat. I kept walking. Next came a field. Empty now, but once planted with corn or soybeans, I couldn't tell which. The stalks had been pulled long ago, but their ghosts remained thin rows of uneven soil stretching toward the horizon like ribs. I stopped once to rest on a stone fence near the edge of the field. My knees burned, my ankles throbbed, but I didn't cry. I didn't even curse them, Lauren, Alex. I just breathed. And when I stood up again, I felt something strange settle into my chest. Not peace exactly, but clarity. This wasn't a nightmare. It was a moment, and I was living through it. Another mile or two, and I could feel the beginnings of a blister forming where the edge of my shoe rubbed against my heel. I tried to ignore it, focused on the horizon. Then I heard it. The low hum of an engine behind me. I turned around slowly. A pickup truck, red and dust-coated, rolled down the road. It wasn't speeding, just drifting, like the driver was in no particular rush to get anywhere. It slowed as it neared me, the window already down. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his late 50s, broad-shouldered flannel shirt, face like it had been carved from the side of an old oak tree, lined, kind and quietly weathered. His hair was graying at the temples and tucked beneath a cap that read Vermont Garden Society. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. I straightened, dignity first, always. "I'm fine," I said, "just walking." "To where, if you don't mind me asking?" I hesitated. "Home." He nodded, like he understood that word didn't necessarily mean a street address. "I'm heading back to Westfield," he said. "Church garden crew." "I could give you a lift if you'd like." Something in his voice told me he wasn't the type to push, and something in me, tired and sore and not foolishly proud, told me it was time to say yes. "I'd appreciate that," I said. He got out, opened the passenger door for me like it was 1962. I climbed in slowly, careful of my hip. "I'm Henry," he said, once we were rolling again. "Henry Dalton. Emily Carter." He didn't ask what had happened. Didn't ask why a woman my age was walking alone down a deserted road with no luggage, no phone, and a face full of wind. He just drove. The cab smelled like pine mulch and tobacco. The radio was set to a classical station, low and tinny. We passed more fields, a few barns, a mailbox painted like a cow. After a while he spoke. "Sometimes good people," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, "get tested in the ugliest ways." I turned to him, not shocked, not emotional, just seen. "Yes," I said. "They do." We didn't speak much more after that. He took me all the way to the edge of town. I asked him to drop me off 2 blocks from my house. I didn't want him to see the place just yet, not in the state I suspected I'd find it. He pulled over gently, put the truck in park. "You sure you're okay from here?" I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the lips but tells the truth anyway. "I've walked farther for less." He nodded once, tipped his cap, then drove off. I stood on the corner a while after he disappeared, holding the moment like a warm cup between my hands. Maybe the world hadn't gone entirely cold after all. By the time I turned onto my street, the wind had softened. The sky, once pale and cruel, was now bruised with late afternoon clouds. My feet ached, my hip throbbed, and a line of dust clung to the hem of my coat. But I had made it, home. At first glance, nothing was wrong. The front yard was exactly as I'd left it, untamed, modest, but mine. The bird feeder still hung askew from the maple branch. The little stone frog beside the porch steps still wore its chipped grin. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence felt wrong. Not the usual hush of a quiet house, but something too still, too placed. I shut the door gently behind me and stood in the entryway listening. There was a smell I couldn't quite place. Clean, yes, but foreign. Artificial. A floral note stronger than my usual lavender spray, something sharper, younger. I followed it toward the kitchen. Everything looked intact. No broken windows, no scattered belongings. The chairs were neatly pushed in around the table. The kettle still sat on the back burner, untouched. But when I reached for the light switch, I noticed something that made me pause. The framed photo on the hallway wall, David and me on our wedding day, had been shifted half an inch to the left. No one but me ever touched that wall. I walked into the den, eyes scanning. My notebooks were in their place. The books I'd stacked on the coffee table hadn't moved, but the mail tray looked different. My bank statement, which had arrived earlier that week, was missing. I moved to the small study at the back of the house. This is where David used to keep his ledgers, where I paid bills, organized our finances, stored important documents. The air smelled faintly of that same artificial floral note. I reached for the middle drawer of the oak desk. It stuck. When I finally forced it open, a sharp chill ran down my spine. Everything had been rearranged. The folders were no longer in my order. The labels had been rewritten slightly off in handwriting, like someone trying to copy mine, but failing to notice the way I cross my T's or loop my G's. Receipts were missing. The envelope labeled Mortgage Refinance 2020 was gone. I dropped to my knees and opened the lower cabinet. Rummaged through the metal box that held our original life insurance paperwork. It was still there, but loose. Not clipped the way I always kept it. Someone had been here. I sat back on the carpet, breath shallow. This wasn't just about abandonment. This was premeditated. The phone was still in my purse. I pulled it out, thankful I hadn't lost it on the road. The battery was low, but enough. I opened my banking app, entered my password slowly. It took a moment to load, and then I saw it. My main account, the one David and I had shared for over 40 years, the one I'd kept active in both our names even after he passed, now listed 2 owners. Emily S., Carter, Lauren A. Harper. I blinked. Refreshed the page. It was still there. My heart didn't race. It slowed, not with calm, but with the cold clarity that something long suspected had now stepped into the light. She hadn't just left me at the train station to test my memory. She had been here, in my house. She had gone through my files, and now, somehow, she had managed to add herself as a joint account holder on the very funds David and I had built together over a lifetime. It couldn't have been done without paperwork. A signature. A copy of my ID, maybe. I stood up slowly. My legs were stiff from kneeling, but I moved with purpose. I walked back into the kitchen, filled the kettle with water, and placed it on the stove. My hands moved out of habit, not thought. Tea first, then action. I pulled out the small notebook from my purse, the one with David's handwriting on the inside cover, and began writing. May 11th. Returned home. Signs of entry, no forced break-in, drawer disturbed, account modified. Joint owner added, Lauren A. Harper. I underlined her name once, then again. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. Instead, I did what I've always done in times of quiet disaster. I wrote it down, because one day soon, someone would ask me to explain what happened. And I would be ready. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap. It always did. I'd kept the same cleaning spray for years, one of those old brands you can only find at hardware stores with squeaky floors and calendars from 2007 still hanging behind the register. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once spread out brown paper lunch bags with Alex's name written in green marker. Every morning before school, I made his sandwich turkey with cheddar, no crust, apple slices, 1 cookie, always homemade. That was our rhythm, even after David died. I held on to it because children need patterns. I believed, perhaps naively, that if I could keep the kitchen steady, his grief might not take root in the deepest parts of him. I traced a finger over the grooves in the wooden surface. So many years of elbows and dropped forks and spilled cereal. It had become our family's archive without meaning to. And now, it would become my war table. The teacup beside me steamed gently, untouched. I wasn't thirsty. My stomach had curled in on itself ever since I'd seen Lauren's name listed beside mine on the bank app. I could hear David's voice in my head, steady and low, from the days when his mind was still sharp. Always write down the truth, Em, even if no one believes it yet. Write it before the story gets rewritten by someone louder. That was his way, quiet but meticulous. A man who filed receipts in triplicate, who stored copies of our wills in 3 different locations, who believed in documentation the way some people believed in prayer. I opened my notebook and began. I wrote down every detail I could remember since the phone call, the phrasing Lauren had used, the exact time she asked me to meet her at the train station, the layout of the bench, the folded note. I noted the smell in the house, the position of the wedding photo on the wall, the rearranged documents, and most importantly, the evidence of financial tampering. It wasn't about emotion. It was about fact. Because if this was going to become a legal matter, and I was beginning to suspect it would, I needed more than memory. I needed a timeline. Proof. A story that didn't crack under scrutiny. I went to the cabinet where we kept the spare printer paper and pulled out a manila folder. I labeled it in block letters. May Incident, 2025. Under it, in smaller handwriting, I added, just in case they try to rewrite the ending. Then I printed out a fresh statement from the bank, highlighting Lauren's name. I made 3 copies. One I placed in the folder, one I slid behind a cookbook in the kitchen. The third I sealed in an envelope and tucked under the loose floorboard in the hallway, the one David had reinforced but never fixed, calling it our little vault. Next, I opened the drawer in the hallway desk where we kept our modest emergency fund. I counted the cash, $220 in 20s and 5s. I took $40 and walked the 2 blocks to Jensen's Electronics Hardware. The young man behind the counter barely looked up from his phone. "Do you sell voice recorders?" I asked. He motioned toward a dusty end-cap shelf near the back. They weren't fancy, just small, battery-operated devices the size of a matchbox with USB ports for transfer. I picked one with the best microphone rating, paid in cash, and didn't give my name. On the way home, I stopped by the church rummage sale and found what I needed, an old picture frame, slightly chipped at the corner but heavy and wooden. I chose it because it looked like something no one would ever bother to move, just background, just noise. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table once more, unscrewing the back of the frame. I secured the recorder inside, angled it to catch voices in the room, then reassembled it. I placed the frame on the fireplace mantel in the living room next to the crocheted angel and the dried flowers from David's memorial. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. Then I walked back to the study. I stared at the drawer Lauren had tampered with. It was still slightly misaligned. I didn't touch it. Let her think I hadn't noticed. Let her feel confident enough to come back and try again. I would wait, and I would listen. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's surveillance. It began with the calendar. I marked my next doctor's appointment on the wrong date intentionally. I told Lauren it was on the 14th when it was truly on the 16th. Then, a few days later, I left my reading glasses in the refrigerator, nestled beside the leftover chicken and a jar of peach jam. When Lauren accidentally dropped by with a casserole, I let her find them. She laughed, not kindly, but sweetly, like someone humoring a child. "Oh, Emily," she said, shaking her head, "you really should start writing things down." "I try," I told her with a small shrug, "but my handwriting isn't what it used to be." I saw it flicker in her eyes, then something like satisfaction. It's a strange thing, pretending to unravel. I thought it might feel like defeat, but it didn't. It felt like building a stage. Every forgotten item, every misplaced object, every delayed name was a prop I placed deliberately. I wasn't losing my grip, I was tightening it. Lauren came around more often after that, offering to help with errands, suggesting we talk about long-term options. One afternoon, she even left a pamphlet on the kitchen table for a senior living facility 2 towns over. Just something to think about, she'd said, sipping tea she hadn't made for me in years. I smiled. Nodded. All the while, the recorder behind the photo frame captured it all, the small slips, the patronizing tone, the calculated charm. But it wasn't until the following week that I caught what I needed. They were in the living room, Lauren and Alex. I had just excused myself to lie down. I left the door cracked open and made sure to step quietly, socked feet over the carpeted stairs. The recording caught everything. Alex, low-voiced, anxious. She's still sharp some days. I don't know if we can. Lauren, cold, decisive. If we move fast, Mom's memory will do the rest of the work for us. A pause, then. Once the paperwork's in motion, she won't even remember when it started. She said it like someone discussing a business deal, like someone who had forgotten I was a person and not just an obstacle to their comfort. I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. I removed the recorder that night, copied the audio file onto a USB drive, and labeled it in David's handwriting. Truth, May 2025. The next morning, I walked to the town church under a sky washed in silver. Henry was there, tending to the raised beds behind the chapel. He looked up from a pot of rosemary when I approached. "I need to ask you something," I said. He dusted off his gloves. "Of course." I handed him the envelope. Inside was the USB drive, copies of the bank statement, and a notarized summary of my notes. I had spent all night preparing it. "If anything happens to me," I said softly, "this needs to get to Ruth Keegan." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "The attorney?" "My husband's old lawyer," I nodded. "She handled our estate for years. She's meticulous, and she's mean as a badger when someone lies in court." Henry took the envelope without hesitation. "I'll keep it safe," he said. I thanked him, then walked back to my house slowly, methodically. At home, I called Ruth. She remembered me immediately. "Emily Carter," she said, her voice dry and sharp. "You're still standing, I take it." "Barely," I said, and then explained what had happened. I told her about the trip, the note, the forged co-ownership on my bank account, and most importantly, the recording. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Come in tomorrow, early. We'll freeze the account and file for injunctive relief. If they're trying for guardianship, we'll stop it before the ink dries." I felt something then. Not triumph, not even relief, just steadiness. As if all the loose pieces of me had finally agreed to stand still for a moment. That night, I sat again at the kitchen table. This time with a fresh notebook. I opened it, wrote a single sentence on the first page. "They tried to erase me with whispers, so I'll answer with records." I closed the cover and placed it beside the tea kettle. Then I slept. And not deeply, but peacefully enough. Tomorrow, I would begin again. On my own terms. Justice doesn't always wear a gavel or arrive in grand speeches. Sometimes it begins in a quiet office, under the hum of fluorescent lights, where 2 women sit across a heavy oak desk with a pot of cold coffee between them. Ruth Keegan's office hadn't changed much since David and I last sat there, reviewing our wills 20 years ago. Same brown blinds, same framed degree from Boston University Law, same photo of her bulldog Max taped to the filing cabinet. She still wore her hair in a low bun, and she still spoke with the calm irritation of someone who'd seen too many schemes dressed up as family concern. "You did well, Emily," she said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. "This audio recording, gold. And these notes? This is the kind of documentation most people don't think to keep." I shrugged lightly. "David trained me." She smiled, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. That morning, Ruth filed 2 motions in probate court. 1, an emergency petition to suspend any guardianship proceedings initiated by Lauren Harper or Alexander Carter, and 2, a formal injunction to freeze all financial activity tied to my name, particularly the shared account they had tampered with. She typed faster than any lawyer I'd ever seen. While she drafted affidavits, I sat in the corner chair, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. At one point, she looked up and asked, "Do you want to file criminal charges?" I didn't answer right away. "No," I said. "Not yet. I want them to feel it first, the silence." She understood. By noon, everything was filed. Ruth knew the probate judge, an old colleague named Hartley, with a reputation for patience and a loathing for paperwork errors. She called his clerk directly. By 2:00 p.m., the court had reviewed the emergency filings. At 2:47 p.m., a formal court order was faxed to Ruth's office. It bore the judge's signature and the court's raised seal. It was done. Order to suspend guardianship petition, effective immediately. Motion to freeze all asset transfers. Granted. It meant that any attempt Lauren and Alex had made or planned to make to assume control over my legal or financial life was now legally blocked. The bank had been notified. So had the Department of Elder Services. Ruth leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Well," she said, "they're going to have a very interesting morning." I didn't smile, not yet, but my lungs felt fuller than they had in days. That night, I boiled potatoes and baked a chicken. Nothing fancy, just food that filled the house with memory. I lit the kitchen lamp David had installed years ago, the one with the hummingbird shade, and sat by the window while the wind tapped against the glass. Across town, I imagined the confusion as Lauren logged into the account and saw the error message. I imagined Alex's voicemail box filling up with calls from the financial advisor who could no longer move their family estate plan forward. I pictured the expression on Lauren's face when a letter from the court arrived, stamped with language she couldn't control. Petition denied, under investigation. It was not vengeance I wanted, it was stillness. It was the ability to breathe in my own home, knowing the walls were not listening for weakness. At 9:32 p.m., my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a third. No messages left. Just silence on the line. Good. They were learning what it felt like when manipulation hit the wall of consequence. I took the folded court order from the manila folder and placed it inside the drawer of David's old desk, just beneath the photo of our anniversary trip to Acadia. I touched the frame gently and whispered aloud, "We're still here, love." Because we were. Even if the house had been ransacked by deception, even if our names had been dragged through paperwork without consent, even if my son had stood silent in the wake of his wife's ambition, we were still here, and now, so was the law, not as a sword, but as a locked door. Some things don't fall with thunder. They crack first in visible lines running under the surface, growing slowly until one morning, the whole foundation shifts with a groan. That was Lauren's world now, and I had the luxury of watching it from my kitchen window with a lukewarm cup of tea in hand. The first crack came at the bank. According to Ruth, who received a courtesy call from the branch manager, it happened around 10:04 a.m. Lauren Harper marched into the East Belmont branch wearing her pressed white coat, oversized sunglasses, and her usual tight smile. She brought with her a folder, a signature pen, and the confidence of someone who had spent years walking into places and making demands that sounded like favors. She asked to transfer $28,000 from the shared account into a new estate fund in her name. The teller, a woman named Denise, politely informed her that the account had been frozen by court order. Lauren blinked. "I'm a co-owner," she said. "I have legal authority." Denise held her composure, but she had a script every bank employee does when something like this happens. She explained that the CO ownership was now under legal dispute and that no transactions could be approved until the matter was resolved by the court. Further access had been suspended. Even logins were blocked. Lauren's smile faltered. She asked to speak to the branch manager. She got the same answer. No funds, no transfers, no access. She left 15 minutes later without $1 and, according to Denise's quiet call to Ruth, without a shred of her earlier poise. That evening, she made her next move. She went online. I don't follow social media, but Ruth does, especially when things smell of desperation. She showed me the post on her iPad that afternoon. Lauren had created a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Us Protect Our Family from Legal Abuse." In the post, she described a situation in which an elderly relative suffering cognitive decline had been sabotaged by external legal forces and confused by bad actors. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. The subtext was loud, manipulative, and embarrassingly thin. The photo she used was of her and Alex smiling at a summer barbecue, holding a glass of wine and a toddler I didn't recognize, probably borrowed for sympathy. The goal, $50,000. The reality, $75. 4 donations, 3 anonymous. One from someone named Kristen L., who left the comment, "Hope this helps. Sorry you're going through this." It was posted for 36 hours, then quietly deleted. But the internet doesn't forget. That would have been enough embarrassment for some. But Lauren was used to controlling the narrative. When digital sympathy didn't come, she turned back to the real world, trying to salvage her image where it mattered most, our town. But Belmont is small, and Belmont reads. 3 days after the GoFundMe debacle, the Belmont Gazette, our sleepy local paper that usually published stories about flower shows and junior varsity soccer, ran something far more gripping. The headline stretched across the top of the community section. Local couple accused of coercion against elderly family member. No names were listed in the title, but the story didn't pull punches. Inside, the article detailed a court case involving allegations of unauthorized account changes, suspected manipulation for the purpose of legal guardianship, and attempts to isolate an older family member from her finances and property. The story cited unnamed legal sources and quoted one expert on elder rights, who described the case as a disturbing example of what happens when financial exploitation masquerades as care. Ruth had declined to comment, of course, but someone had leaked enough for the town to piece it together, and piece it they did. By dusk that day, my neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door with banana bread and wide eyes. "I read the article," she said gently. "If you need anything, you let me know." I nodded, said thank you, and accepted the bread. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen, something I hadn't done in years. Not out of ritual, but remembrance. Lauren and Alex's empire had been built on a lie they assumed no one would challenge. A lie that said I wouldn't remember, that I wouldn't record, that I wouldn't write. But paper holds truth better than memory, and ink outlasts gaslighting. They underestimated the woman who once handled her household, her husband's hospice, and her child's grief all in the same year. They mistook my silence for absence. But now, their silence was forced, their access denied, their names whispered, not praised. The collapse had begun, and I would not look away. It didn't all fall at once. Some things crumble in stages, first the edges, then the frame, then the foundations that were never quite as solid as people pretended them to be. After the newspaper article, the phone stopped ringing at Lauren's house. Not mine, hers. The boards she sat on 2 local charity foundations, one arts council, and the fundraising committee for the Belmont Children's Literacy Drive, each released statements within a week. Respectful, brief, but final. Due to recent legal proceedings involving allegations of elder financial coercion, we are formally withdrawing Lauren Harper from her role as board advisor, effective immediately. No apologies, no justifications, just removal. Word spread faster than scandal ever hopes to hide. Her social calendar shriveled. The lunch invitations vanished. Holiday party hosts began quietly adjusting guest lists. Even the women who once gossiped with her over Chardonnay at the country club book drives now turned their backs at the local co-op, pretending to examine sweet potatoes until she passed. Lauren's mother, a woman who once sent me lavender-scented lotion at Christmas and referred to herself as Nana by marriage, called only once, according to Ruth, who had begun fielding indirect communications. When Ruth made it clear the matter was under investigation and not open for negotiation, the call ended. So did the family's involvement. What Lauren had built wasn't community. It was performance. And when the audience walked out, the curtains didn't just close, they collapsed. But that wasn't the part that moved me. The part that caught in my throat came on a quiet Wednesday when Henry stopped by with a package under his arm and a cautious smile on his face. "I found this at the church rummage sale," he said. "It had your name on the inside flap. Thought you might want it back." I took the bundle in my hands, peeled away the brown paper, and froze. It was a photo album. Not just any album, ours. The one David and I had started after our wedding in 1981, leather-bound, black pages with corner stickers holding each photo in place. I must have boxed it during one of our house cleanouts after he passed, and somehow, in a fog of grief or distraction, it had ended up in the donation pile. I'd forgotten it existed. My fingers trembled as I opened the first page. David in a gray suit, tie askew, grinning at the camera as I held a bouquet of wildflowers we'd picked that morning. I could almost hear his voice. "You blinked during the kiss, Em. We have to redo it." The next page held a picture of the house before the porch was painted, then a blurry but joyful photo of me, pregnant, sitting on a checkered picnic blanket with a carton of ice cream in my lap. And then Alex. Alex in David's arms at the hospital, Alex toddling through autumn leaves, Alex age 7, missing a front tooth and hugging a stuffed dinosaur so tightly you'd think it was breathing. I traced the image gently. For a moment, I waited for the pain, the searing kind I'd felt for months, grief not for a child lost, but for the child who chose to lose me. But the ache didn't come. Instead, there was a strange stillness, a clarity. I whispered, almost to myself, "I lost the boy in that photo long ago." My eyes didn't blur. My chest didn't tighten. But I kept myself. That mattered more than I had allowed myself to believe, because that photo, what it captured, was real. I had been a good mother, a steady mother. I had held the sandwiches together, stitched the costumes, stayed up through fevers and heartbreaks and algebra homework. I had loved without ledger. And though he had turned away, I had not disappeared. I closed the album softly, pressing the leather cover flat with both hands. Henry didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stepped outside, paused by the porch railing and said, "If you ever want me to build you a new frame for one of those, I've got some walnut scraps in the shed." I smiled. "Maybe I'll take you up on that," I said. That evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of ginger tea and the album on my lap. The house felt full in a way that had nothing to do with visitors. It was quiet, safe, mine. The truth had echoed, not as revenge, but as release. The knock came just after noon. It was soft, hesitant, not the kind of knock that wants to be answered, but the kind that hopes maybe it won't be. I opened the door. Alex stood there, thinner than I remembered, the sharp lines of his face more pronounced, like someone who'd been living in rooms without mirrors. His coat looked 2 sizes too big, or maybe he'd just gotten smaller. There were no bags in his hands, no notes, no folder of papers, only a photograph. He held it in both hands, like it might break if he breathed wrong. It was us. A faded photo from 1999. David in the middle, arms wrapped around us both. I was in my gardening apron, laughing. Alex had just lost a tooth, and his grin was lopsided and proud. Someone had snapped it without us knowing, a moment unposed, real. He placed it gently on the table beside the door. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I don't expect anything." No rehearsed apology, no speech, no excuses. I looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," I said. We didn't go to the living room. I led him to the kitchen. The same table, the same window, the same chipped mug that had seen 100 winters. I poured him tea. He didn't touch it. Neither of us cried. There were no dramatic reckonings, no rising music, no poetic monologues. Just 2 people in a house too familiar to fill with anything but silence. He stared at the floor. "I didn't know she'd go that far," he murmured. I didn't respond, because silence was its own answer. I thought, he started, then stopped. I don't know what I thought. He looked up then, really looked. For the first time in years, his face held something I hadn't seen since he was 10 years old and broke a neighbor's window playing baseball accountability without deflection. I let him sit in that silence for a while. Then I spoke, calm, even. If you come back, I said, you come with respect, not with need. He nodded, not eagerly, not as a performance, just understood. We sat like that for another minute or two. The clock on the stove ticked. Outside, a few gold leaves tumbled across the porch. He didn't stay long. No meal, no discussion of next steps, just a quiet thank you and a glance toward the old family photo as he left. I walked him to the door. When he stepped outside, I remained on the wooden threshold. The wind picked up, brushing my sleeves and catching the steam from my tea. I didn't wave. I just stood there, holding the cup in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. And when the screen door clicked shut behind me, I didn't feel sadness. I felt sovereign. For the first time in years, I wasn't the footnote in someone else's version of events. I wasn't the backup plan, the emotional cushion, or the silent benefactor whose name got mentioned in passing, if at all. I wasn't a shadow in someone else's story. I was standing in the sunlight of my own. The house behind me was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It held truth. It held memory. And now, it held a future that belonged entirely to me. To the woman who gave more than she should have, who stayed silent so others could speak louder, who sat through dinners where her name was forgotten and holidays where her seat was empty. This story was for you. You are not invisible. You are not the past tense in someone else's legacy. You are the keeper of memory, the record of what was real, and the author of what comes next. And if you're still waiting for respect, for peace, for someone to finally see you as whole, let this be your sign. You don't have to wait to be worthy. You already are. If this story found a place in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter. We tell stories for women like you because you deserve to be heard first, not last. More voices are coming. Make sure you're here to hear them.